Until fairly recently, the position of opposition to the European Union was always a mainstream position on the left. It's only over more recent years that much of the left has turned into a bit of a fanatical club in favour of the EU. So if you go back a little way, you can look at people like Tony Benn and Bob Crow, the General Secretary, late Bob Crow, General Secretary of the RMT.
And Jeremy Corbyn.
And Jeremy Corbyn, and John McDonnell, and Peter Shaw, and Barbara Castle, and real big hitters like that in the Labour movement, who were opposed to the European Union, predominantly because they saw it as what it is, an anti-democratic and anti-socialist institution, an institution that embeds austerity, embeds deflationary economics, and the view of people on the left is that actually, as socialists, we're in favour of things like public ownership, whereas the EU is much more geared towards privatisation. We're in favour of investment, even at times of recession and when the economy is flatlining, whereas the EU, particularly if you look at what it did to Greece, is much more in favour of a kind of neoliberal approach to these sorts of things. And from the point of view of socialists, you've got to be able to elect and remove the people who govern you. That's a fundamental principle. It should be a fundamental principle for anybody on the left, that actually the people who are making your laws and the people who have a large say over your economy must be accountable to the people. And in many cases, they're not. And I always remember the 5 questions that Tony Benn used to ask. He said whenever he met anyone famous, he used to ask 5 questions. What power have you got? How did you get it? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you?
Must have been a popular guy.
And that's and it's that. Well, he became a national treasure, of course, in the end, didn't he? But back in his heyday in the 70s and 80s, he was absolutely.
It was brilliant,
demonized.
absolutely brilliant.
And it's that 5th question, how can we get rid of you, which goes to the heart, I think, of the debate about the debate about the European Union. You've got to have power over the people who ultimately are making your laws, and in many cases, directives and regulations come from the EU, which members of Parliament have no say on, and we, as citizens of this country, have to abide by. You can then get into the more technical details and talk about things like restrictions on state aid. So at the moment, for example, there's a huge debate around whether we should nationalise British Steel in light of the problems it's been experiencing over the last few days. And actually, if you look at EU regulations, we can't do that because they have because it's so in favour of market forces, they have to have what they call this level playing field. So state aid from countries which give, in their view, an unfair leg up to particular companies is wrong. And in fact, in 2016, the EU fined the Italian and Belgian governments for trying to rescue failing steelmakers by bailing them out. You've got things like the Stability and Growth Pact, which says that member states cannot run a budget deficit of more than 3% of GDP. Now, anyone who sort of understands economics in terms of the right approach to tackling a flatlining economy and a recession, what Maynard Keynes taught us in the 1930s is that actually you need to maintain levels of investment during a recession, because if the government cuts and slashes at a time when everybody else is doing it, no one's going to create a recovery. So it's the government's job to sort of hold the line. And that Stability and Growth Pact makes it very, very difficult to do that. So in effect, they've ruled out Maynard Keynesian economics from the EU. And then you can look at the mass unemployment that's taking place across Europe. You can look at the renewed tensions that have appeared between particular countries, Germany and Greece, for example. So all in all, this idea that the EU is some progressive, benevolent, democratic organisation which is in favour of workers and in favour of the interests of ordinary people is a total and utter nonsense. And the left-wing case was always built around some of the stuff that I just said. But now, unfortunately, so many people on the left seem to have fallen in love with it.